Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Idaho House Republicans podcast, where you get to learn a little bit more about the representatives that you have sent to the State House. And today we're really grateful to have Representative James Petzke, and he represents Legislative District 21, and he sits in Seat A. He is in his second term, and thank you for joining us, Representative James Petzke.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. Appreciate you having me on.
Hey, I want to tell you a little about James before we start our interview. He was raised in Haley, Idaho, and he has a BA from BSU and a master's in finance from Harvard University Extension School. And he has been 10 years at various e-commerce businesses. Tell us about your e-commerce business, like the type of e-commerce businesses you've been involved in.
Yeah, so I did all kinds of things, actually. Right out of college, I was definitely an entrepreneur type guy, right? And I started out in freelance web design and then started selling things on commission. And then eventually I started selling my own products. So I ran Upland Optics was my biggest one. Sold sporting optics for hunters, so binoculars, spotting scopes, rangefinders, stuff like that. I also had a company called Kachara Cookware. We sold like stainless steel pots and pans and some nonstick stuff. I had another company that sold saunas and another company that sold Fitbits. I did all kinds of different e-commerce things. I sold out of most of the businesses before I ran for office. One thing I've definitely learned in this gig is it's hard to do two things at once, especially if you're like me and you go all in on whatever you're doing.
Right, so, exactly.
Yep.
And I don't see a common theme in all those products. You just can sell anything.
The common theme was that I enjoyed business and the process, right? And I really liked, I got in on the e-commerce wave at about the right time when there was a lot of opportunity there for individual entrepreneurs to get started in it. And I was able to build up a little company. We had 7 employees and, a few million in revenue type of, it wasn't a huge operation, but, a decent enough sized business that I could have a lot of fun with it and still maintain the control. So it was a fun thing to do.
And I can testify because I know James pretty well, and he is an avid hunter and he is an avid outdoorsman and he loves to camp. You love the outdoors in Idaho.
Absolutely. I counted it up actually recently because we were talking about public land stuff. Last year I spent 35 nights in a tent on Idaho public land.
Wow.
I ran 4 ultra marathons. I shot a deer, I shot an elk, I shot a turkey, and I got married all on Idaho public lands. So big fan of what we got going on here in the state.
Well done. You got married on public lands?
We did, yeah. Ponderosa State Park. It's a great time.
I'll be dipped.
Yeah.
At least you're consistent, right?
Exactly.
You love public, so you have a voice on public lands.
Absolutely.
So first thing we always ask people, Representative Petzke, is you represent Legislative District 21. Tell people, where is Legislative District 21 and what issues do they care about in your legislative district?
Yeah, great question. So District 21, it's Meridian. And really, you can think of it as kind of the heart of Meridian. It runs from Victory Road up to Ustick. So downtown Meridian, everything. And actually, it grabs a little tiny slice of Boise, too. I've just got, I've got a couple of neighborhoods that are in the city of Boise as well, kind of over by Topgolf. And then it goes all the way out to McDermott Road. So kind of the heart of Meridian. Issues that frequently come up in my district, transportation is, of course, a big one. Right. Everybody who lives in Meridian pretty much commutes from one place to another, and especially those of us that are coming from downtown, obviously. That is definitely a top of mind priority for all of my constituents. Education is another big one. We've got West Ada School District in Meridian, obviously, and they do a fantastic job. We have great schools. They're one of the best school districts really in the country.
Derek Bubb.
Derek Bubb's the man. He does a really great job. He's really forward thinking. Like he and I, we worked together last year on the bill to take his cell phone policy that he implemented at West Ada statewide. Right. That was a really big win.
And just remind people what that did.
Yeah, so that bill basically said that every district has to have a policy around distraction-free learning and getting cell phones out of schools. So think of it like, we all know that students in classrooms, if they're using cell phones, they're distracted, they're not learning, right? That's just no brainer. And so what our bill did is said you have to come up with a policy around that. We left some an element of local control to it because we knew that what works for West Ada may not necessarily work for, a little tiny school district, even where I grew up in Haley, right? A much smaller school. So we left a little bit of a local control element, but it says you have to have a policy that addresses distraction-free learning and getting cell phones out of classrooms.
So issues are transportation, education, any other big issues for your district?
Of course, the standard stuff always applies, right? Like people are always talking about taxes. That's always a big one. And
housing affordability.
Housing affordability, property taxes in particular because of that. That's certainly a big one. But issues that I think of as being really specifically important to my district, transportation is definitely number one, just because of where we are in the middle of Meridian right there.
So let's talk. You're a second termer, and you You were young when you joined the legislature. How can you tell people how old were you when
I
you
was 20.
elected?
I must have been 28 when I was elected.
Okay, so where does that rank you in the all-time youngest
Yeah.
people elected to the state house? It's got to be up there.
I think I'm close, but I know that there have been people that are younger. I actually believe Jim Yost, if you know that name, he was 24 when he got elected to the state Senate.
Oh, wow.
And that was almost 60 years ago.
Senate.
I think. Yeah, and he was elected to the Senate, and he's actually a constituent of mine now and a good friend. So kind of funny how that works.
Yeah,
and
full circle.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know where exactly I rank, but I'm probably up there.
So as a 28-year-old, why did you run for the state house?
Good question. So I mean, like I was talking about earlier, I had just sold some businesses. That was a big part of it, right? So I had some time and some financial flexibility open up. I mean, it's hard to do this job if you don't have those things. I don't know how people do it if you haven't, if you don't have some element of flexibility in your life. And I wanted to do something after that was more public service oriented. Public office was something that I'd always been interested in. I'd always been interested in government and in policy in particular. The politics side of it, I'm less of a fan of, but I love the policy side and the government side and figuring out how to make a system that works well for everybody, and works to maximize, benefits to the taxpayers and the citizens. And so I was interested in it, and it just so happened that at that time redistricting took place. And after redistricting, there were 3 open seats in my district. And so it was one of those things, like, you call it a God thing or whatever, but I mean, like, the timing was just perfect.
Serendipitous, right?
Exactly. I mean, it was just the seat was open. I had the financial flexibility and the time, and I was looking for something that was public service oriented. So I decided to throw my name in the hat. I had a crazy first primary. I knocked on over 3,500 doors and barely squeaked out a win. I won by 61 votes.
Because what was it? 4 people ran in that race?
4-way primary.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, congratulations. And then
the
second one was a little easier.
It was. Yeah. I mean, it was still a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it was good.
So now let's talk about the committees on which you serve. Representative Petzke, what are those?
So the 2 afternoon committees that I have, I've got resources and conservation, which I love that committee. That's the fish and game issues. That's all the public land issues we were talking about. That one's definitely my passion project committee. And then I've got transportation. So bringing it back to that issue, that is certainly of high importance for my constituents. We've got Chairman Palmer in there. He's been running that committee for a long time, and in Meridian.
Very fine.
So that's a great committee. Lots of cool issues working on in there. And then the biggest lift that I have is I serve on appropriations, JFAC as it's more commonly known. So that's the committee that sets the budget. And so this
Joint Finance-Appropriations Committee.
Yes, exactly. And that's because the Senate has a finance committee and the House has an appropriations committee, and we meet jointly. So we call it JFAC.
That makes sense. Now, a little inside baseball for people. What does an afternoon committee mean versus a morning committee?
Yeah, so your morning committees on the House side anyway, they're the big committees, right? So they're it's State Affairs, Education, JFAC, Health
June
and
Rules.
Welfare.
June Rules is afternoon.
And Rev and Tax.
Okay.
So they're the committees that have the biggest issues, the most consequential issues. Not to say the afternoon committees don't oftentimes have big issues, but the morning committees are considered the big ticket.
And
ones.
Volume. There tend to be more bills.
And that's why the morning committees, they meet every day. The afternoon committees are every other day. They alternate.
Right.
And so that's why it's structured that way. So you have your busiest committees meeting every day.
And the reason you have to have 2 afternoon committees is because you are on the Joint Finance-Appropriations Committee, which meets every single day.
Every day.
Through the whole session.
Until we get to the very, very end sometimes, and then we get lucky. It depends on how the budgets, like if all the budgets are passing and we're good, then sometimes we get lucky and we take a day off. But it depends.
Sometimes meetings start at 7 a.m., sometimes they start at 8 a.m. So it is a true commitment for those that are on that. Remind people how it's structured. How many people from the House? How many people from the Senate? How does the voting work? Yeah,
so we've got 10 members in the House, 10 members in the Senate. The way the votes work is you have to get a majority on both sides, both bodies to pass, right? So you need to get 6 votes in the House and 6 votes on the Senate side for a motion to pass. The nice thing about the Joint Committee is we do all so much of our work without having to, do a bill on the House side, do a bill on the Senate side, and then get together and hash out the difference. We hash out that difference in committee before those bills go out to the full bodies. So it saves a lot of work. Idaho is unique in that we're one of only we might be the last one left at this point that has a true joint appropriations committee like that. And it's honestly, it's a great process. I think we're the envy of the country in that, because every other state, they'll pass a bill on the House side, then they'll pass a bill on the Senate side, and then they usually have to do what's called a conference committee. Yeah, reconciliation conference committee. Exactly. And that's just a lot more work and a lot more opportunity for, shenanigans in there. Right. So you're hashing that out together right from the start. Exactly. That's the idea.
So how long have you been on JFAC?
All 4 years now.
All 4 years.
Yep.
So now let's talk about 4 years ago when you started, there was a movement to change the way the budget is done. What was the process before, and what is the process now?
Yeah. So it was actually 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, we changed. We used to run the way that our budget bills used to work is every individual agency would have one appropriations bill for the year. And so, if you just take Fish and Game, right? Fish and Game would have one appropriations bill. We'd vote on it in JFAC. It would include the whole Fish and Game budget, including all their enhancements and all that, and their base budget. And that would get sent out to the floor and they'd either pass or fail. And if it failed, it'd send it back and we'd have to do it again. With that process, of course, we have to go home with a balanced budget, right? That's our one job as a legislature. So we had to pass each of those individual budget bills at the end of the day. If one of them failed, we would take it back to JFAC, make some changes to get, try to get consensus, and then send it back out again. 3 years ago, we changed the process under the chairman at the time. And basically,
Wendy Horman in the Senate chair was Scott Grow. Is Grow.
Yep.
Still
is Grow. Yep. And they changed the process so that we did a maintenance budget first, is what we call it. And basically what that means is we lump together a big omnibus budget that includes the base for all of the agencies. So it's all the spending essentially that they did last year with some adjustments, for things like health insurance and whatnot, that every agency, all the statewide decisions is what we call them, the things that are going to be adjusted for every agency. And then we run separate enhancement bills for any of the line item additions that agencies have. And that's, there's pros and cons to both systems, honestly. The more I do this job, the less I think that the process is the thing that makes, determines whether or not it's going to work. It's more about the people and can you get the consensus to get the votes. Either of those processes work if you're getting people on board with the budget that you want to get across. It's more of a matter of that than it is of the process itself.
Okay, now let's talk about the budget itself. Okay. The first thing that always happens is what they call the revenue number.
Yes.
And the governor has a revenue number, and then you ultimately have to adopt a revenue number to start the budget process. How did that work out, and how closely was it aligned with the governor's view?
Yeah, so the governor gave us a what I would say was a very, very conservative revenue number. And that's something that we want to do, right? We try to aim low on the revenue number because that's your top line number that you're budgeting off of.
Right.
So if you use a really optimistic projection, it's just more likely that you're going to be wrong and then you're going to have a deficit, and then you're going to have to come back and fix it, right? And so that's what we try to avoid.
Right.
So the governor took a really, really conservative approach with his revenue number. But then after he had already submitted his revenue number, we got a couple of months of very strong revenue coming in.
Right.
The real reason that revenue had been kind of shortfalling last year was because of the One Big Beautiful Bill and some of the changes to corporate income tax. And then what we saw happen was in December, corporations all of a sudden made all that up. In fact, we made up 100% of what was in a deficit from the corporate income tax perspective. So after that happened, we decided we could take a little bit more a little bit more
aggressive,
a little bit more aggressive, revenue number. It's a difference of in total, it's less than $200 million if I'm remembering correctly. The difference between our numbers and the governor's numbers between the two fiscal years.
Yeah,
it's not a massive difference.
I think it's around 110 million.
And I believe that's the fiscal year 27 number. And then you add a little bit in for 26 as well, if I remember right. But then the other difference was right away on the revenue side, we passed a tax conformity bill that went retroactive to fiscal year 26. Right. The governor did not bake that into his budget. So we lost all of our revenue gain on the fiscal year 26 side right out of the gate with that revenue change on conformity. So we really kind of came out at a wash with what the governor was recommending and what we ended up choosing on the revenue side because of that bill. But that was something that we felt like we had to do. And honestly, that's what the governor said we were going to do. If you listen to a State of the State speech, it just wasn't reflected in his budget. And so that's why we felt like we had to do that.
So by the way, Idahoans can go on the Idaho legislature website, and there's resources there, and you can actually look at the budget monitor and see how the numbers come in every month. And as Representative Petzke alluded to, if you looked at the December monitor, it showed the revenue at $5.553 billion with a deficit of $40 million. But now by February, the revenue number was up to $5.665 billion. And what do you know? Surplus of $118 million, even with the big beautiful bill in there.
True.
So it's funny, the press was all over this deficit, and now that it's back to a surplus, We haven't heard much about the surplus.
Right.
But
The press and the Democrats, for sure. That was certainly a talking point for a while there. And I don't understand why they went down that road. It was kind of short-sighted because I can promise you we were going to balance the budget one way or another. We weren't
right,
going on with the deficit, right?
right.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll say on the revenue number too is, we're definitely still being cautious. There's 4 quarters in the game, right? And
Right.
we've still got, and in fact, April is always the most important month, obviously, for tax filings. So there's, we're not counting our eggs before they hatch, right? So we're waiting to see and make sure that things are stable, and we're trying to leave ourselves a little bit of breathing room in case things change.
And part of what happened, I think, in last year's budget, Representative Petzke, is that you had the big beautiful bills passed. Everybody takes a breath and says, well, what do I think this impact is going to be? And you try to base your tax payments based on that. And then there's a reality sets in. Like you said, December, a lot of the money that was being held back came back in. But the bottom line is that there's about $155 million that has been earmarked for the impact of the big beautiful bill for the fiscal year ending July 26.
Yep.
And $175 million for July 27. So how did that enter the mix when you don't expect the big beautiful bill and you don't really know what the impact's going to be? How do you adjust for that?
Right. When we went home last session, we left $450 million in the bottom line,
right?
And we had no idea that the feds were going to do this big tax change,
right?
Like that was. I mean, we knew that there would probably be something, right? But we had no idea what it would be and what the impact would be to the state. I mean, there are a lot of things in there that really changed how things work at the state level, and frankly, we still don't know, right? We have no idea how much tipped income is out there that's going to be taken off the books.
Right.
We have no idea how much vehicle interest is out there that's going to be taken off the books. We make educated guesses.
For American cars, by the way.
Right, exactly, for American cars. That's an important point.
Buy American.
Yep, that's an important point. Yeah, so I mean, we're making an educated guess, and that's how we arrived at the $155 million number. And I know that there's other groups out there that have made projections, and they're some of those are higher, some of those are lower. And that's again, we're making an educated guess. We know that we could be wrong. That's why we're going to try to leave ourselves a little bit of a cushion on the bottom line.
Makes sense.
And we also have our budget stabilization funds that we could use if we really got in a tight spot, especially in the current fiscal year. Like it's hard to cut the budget when you like say we only had 1 month left in the fiscal year and we had a deficit. There's not a lot that you can do at that point because almost all of that budget is already obligated and out the door. So at that point, you would have to use budget stabilization funds. So it kind of depends on when that happens. But we're trying to make sure we leave ourselves a little bit of breathing room so that we don't go into that type of situation.
And we should mention that last year, the governor signed what's called the Idaho Act. And that was basically saying we want a 3% across the board cut for all agencies except education. Mm-hmm. And what were your impressions of that policy move?
Yeah, I mean, the governor has the ability to do that, and that might be the only way that he can do a cut like that. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of doing an across the board approach like that. I definitely am somebody, I like to do things more surgically, and because the problem if you do an across the board cut is the agencies that are already operating on a really lean basis and who are doing things right, they get punished much harder than the agencies who, maybe have a little bit of extra that they could give up and still be okay. So I'm not a huge fan of that approach. He was probably in a box with what he had to do there. We have a little bit more flexibility, so I'm hopeful that we're going to, be a little bit more discerning this year. And I think we're seeing some evidence of that, and not evidence of it in other cases. But yeah, that would be my general take on it.
Okay, so with the new process, in the old process, we'd go budget by budget by budget, 100 plus budgets, right? Now you have these kind of 10 omnibus bills that were passed out of the Joint Finance-Appropriations Committee last week, right? So talk a bit about those bills and what's in the 10 bills. Is it an equal amount of money or is it just based on similar agencies? And how the vote went in terms of, again, that philosophy of surgical cuts versus maybe across the board cuts.
Right. So these 10 omnibus bills, basically, it's the government broken down into functional areas. So you've got K-12 education, you've got the OSB or the Office of the State Board of Education. So that's all the universities, technical education, all that. You've got health and welfare, you've got natural resources, you've got general government, which kind of lumps together a whole bunch of things, economic development. Then you've got the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive, or legislative, judicial, and then constitutional officers are 3 separate bills as well. So it just it's a way to break up the whole budget into functional areas. Mm-hmm. And we did, so the maintenance bill process in the past, the way it's worked is we would pass a maintenance appropriation and I was kind of explaining this earlier, I guess, but a maintenance appropriation was essentially the last year's funding, and then we would go in and add
Right.
enhancements afterwards. Enhancements can be positive or negative. I did quite a few enhancements last year that were negative enhancements.
Okay.
The tricky thing that we have with this maintenance budget process that has caused so much consternation over the last few years with it is, how do you define maintenance? Because everybody wants to play with that definition of maintenance, right? Is a population forecast adjustment maintenance, or is it not? Is health insurance increase?
Inflation.
Is inflation, like
Right.
inflationary cost adjustments, are those maintenance or are they not? This year, what the chairs decided to do is they decided to add an additional rescission on top, or an additional cut on top of the governor's 3% cut that was already done to those maintenance appropriation bills. And for me, that was something that I just, again, going back to my philosophy of, I want to do this surgically and I want to do this right and think through each of these individual cuts, find the areas where we can get a lot of money, leave alone the areas where we would do damage if we would cut them by 2%.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't really like that approach. So I ended up voting no on a 6 out of the 10 maintenance bills. There were some in there that I could get behind because there were things that I think made sense. Like, for example, I have no problem with the legislative branch taking the 2% cut, right? If we're gonna have to go through state government and do cuts, we should be the first ones to take them ourselves.
Right.
So I had no problem voting for that one, right? The K-12 budget was left largely untouched, so I voted for that one.
Right.
And there's a couple others in there that I voted for as well, but I really wish that we would have gone through this more thoughtfully. Frankly, because we excluded all the big ticket items, we excluded education, we excluded Medicaid, we excluded corrections, we excluded ISP. Those are 4 of your biggest budgets. Without them, there really wasn't that much left to cut by 2%. So we only ended up getting, it was less than $30 million for all those cuts. And in a $6 billion almost budget, it really wasn't that much money. So I don't know that it really helped our bottom line that much. The downside is that it made some pretty significant impacts to the operations of some of these smaller agencies. If you're a smaller agency, you can't really afford to take that extra. In total, it's a 5% cut across the board that everybody took. Like, for example, military division. The only thing that they could afford to cut without losing federal match, which is so important. I mean, like, we've got the Air Force Base here and in Mountain Home. I mean, those are important things in the military division that we want to fund as a state because we think they're good things for the state and we want to support our troops. The only thing that they could afford to cut within their budget in that extra 2% was a tuition assistance program that they have for their National Guards members. That's effectively a compensation program that our National Guard members,
That's right,
when they signed up to serve, they put their lives on the line, for our benefit, to serve the public. And that was one of the compensation items that was promised to them. And this cut is going to dramatically affect that. And unfortunately, we took that budget up last week. The committee did not vote to restore it. I think there's a chance that we bring it back again because I think people are realizing that's one that we really need to look at. But that's a great example of why we should be surgical instead of just doing an across the board haircut. I mean, I am not in favor of doing something that's going to take away compensation from our troops. I just don't think that's the right thing to do.
You mentioned I think Medicaid, ISP. You mentioned education. Are those budgets essentially untouched? Is that what you're saying? So there's the cut is not being applied to those.
Right. The extra. So, and there's a little bit of variance between them. So education, the K-12 budget didn't get the cut at all. The Medicaid budget got the 3% cut from the governor, but didn't get the extra 2%.
Gotcha.
Or excuse me, they got the extra 2% on everything except Medicaid. So all the other health and welfare programs got the extra 2%. Corrections, I believe took the 3%, but did not take the extra 2%. And then ISP got exempted from part of the 3% cut, if I remember right. There's some weird things that happened with some of those. But they're our biggest budgets, and they're also the ones that are the hardest to touch. Right. That's kind of ironic how that works.
Well, it's interesting because, as you know, the state controller has done a really good job with this Transparency Idaho. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally at the state level, the city level, every taxing district level, right? And you would think that we have some tools that would be really helpful, that other states don't have, if we chose to be more surgical, that we certainly could be.
Right. Yeah, you would sure hope that. And I think that we could do that if that was the decisions that were being made. That just wasn't the decision that the committee decided to make, on that day when we had that vote. I mean, there's still a lot left in this process, right? Those budgets got through committee, but they have yet to get to the House or the Senate floors. I think there's still a lot of conversation, and then they have to get signed by the governor. So I think there's still going to be a lot more conversation on these cuts before they're a done deal. But yeah, we'll see. That'll be the fun thing to watch.
But the bottom line is the Republican principles of a smaller government, adjusting when the revenue adjusts,
Right.
adjusting to the big, beautiful bill realities.
Right.
We're doing what we're constitutionally required to do, which is balance the budget. And there's going to be some budget cuts that come through this year because we need to balance the budget. And that's what we do in Idaho.
Exactly.
You don't
I could not have said it better.
And we don't want to touch our rainy day fund because it's not really raining.
Right.
Is that right?
I think that's true. I mean, I think we might have to, even the governor in his recommended budget, he actually touched it quite a bit. And he doesn't say that publicly, but if you look at the details on it, he did actually touch it quite a bit. For example, he took out of the public education stabilization fund, PSIF as it's better known, it's at least $50 million that gets taken out of that fund this year. That's a pretty significant hit to that fund. He also took all of the future interest earnings off of a whole number of our stabilization accounts, which is kind of an interesting approach. It's not the way that I would do it. It's basically banking on potential future interest earnings that we haven't made yet. I don't think that the committee is going to go down that road. At least that's the vibe that I'm getting so far. It just, I'd rather take the actual cash out of the account rather than bank on interest earnings that we haven't made yet. That just doesn't quite seem like the right approach to budgeting. So even in the governor's budget, we did hit some of those stabilization funds a little bit. And I should make the comment too, they are stabilization funds, right? We like to throw around the term rainy day funds, but in code, it says budget stabilization. Mm-hmm. And when we have these short-term fluctuations, sometimes you have to use one-time money to bridge a gap. But we're going to your point, we are going to try to match ongoing expenses to ongoing revenue, right? Like that's what everybody wants to do to make sure that we have an ongoing structural balance.
And the process that goes from here is that 5 bills of the 10 will be here in the House.
Yep.
5 goes to the Senate. And
then they'll flip.
And then, so everyone needs to be watching over the next, because none of them have actually made the floor yet. Yes?
Not yet, no.
Okay, so watch for that to see what happens with that and see if there's a chapter 2. Yeah. Right. So before we let you go, a couple of bills that I'd like to discuss with you. One is Senate Bill 1225, which talks about university president searches. And I've heard about this bill. It's fascinating. And it's something that you go like, duh, this is exactly. this is really needed. Tell people about why this is so critical.
Yeah. So I've got a number of policy bills outside of the work in JFAC this year. This is the first one that we got through, and it's signed into law and already in effect, actually, because it went into effect immediately. So we had a statute. It was a well-intentioned part of our public records law in Idaho code that said that for a non-classified position, which that usually means director heads and university presidents, it's the really high-profile ones. Mm-hmm. When you post the job publicly, before you can name the final person, you have to name 5 finalists publicly.
Right.
And I get why, from a public records perspective and a transparency perspective, some legislator back in the day said that's a good idea. We should say publicly who it is. The problem with that, especially in today's age, is it's a massive deterrent for people that are in high-level positions. Because if you're a university president somewhere and you want to apply to be the Boise State president, which is how we really discovered this, is because of what happened with the Boise State president search. Mm-hmm. Why on earth would you be willing to publicly say that I am looking for a new job?
And I want to leave.
Yeah. And you only have a 20% chance that you're going to get that new job.
Exactly.
It just doesn't make sense. And so that bill, we rushed it through this session because we knew that we needed to get that through to get the Boise State search process restarted. The press was the only group that opposed it. Their opposition, they are essentially just always opposed to changing public records law. Right. Frankly, they have an incentive to have that information be public so that they can write articles about it. And, we kind of have to weigh that, okay, there is a public benefit to seeing the names of people who are applying and so that the public can vet them. But at the same time, if it's a massive deterrent, we can't do that.
Well, the other thing too, Representative Petzke, is it reduces the potential pool of talent.
Exactly.
If you're going to bring someone to BSU, you want them to be the absolute best talent we could have to run that school, right? And so you'd be like, well, why am I going to put my name in there and be a finalist and everybody knows I want to leave where I am now? No, that doesn't work.
Exactly.
So, well done. Let's talk about House Bill 672, it is, or 677, 676, which deals with geothermal energy.
Yeah, this is kind of a fun one. And so the city of Boise has a municipal utility that does geothermal heat to about 80 buildings downtown.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that includes the State House where we are right now, right? And geothermal energy is, of course, it's been a priority of the Trump administration. It's something that, is literally under our feet here in the state of Idaho.
And very cheap.
Exactly. And it's something that, it has so much future potential and something that I hope Idaho continues to grow with. But in order to use geothermal heat, you obviously you have to pump water out of the ground. And pumping water out of the ground, of course, that brings in a water rights discussion. And any of the cities who are doing geothermal power, including Boise, they have to go through the same water rights process as any other, say an irrigator who uses the water to irrigate crops. However, most of them, their systems are non-consumptive, meaning that every gallon of water that they pump up to take the heat out of, they pump right back into the aquifer. So they're not actually harming the aquifer in any way. So what we did, this bill, what it's going to do is it's going to remove some of the regulatory burden to readjusting those water rights on an annual basis, or on a 5-year. It's on a 5-year cycle, I believe, and essentially remove some of that red tape, make it easier for the department, make it easier for those municipalities who have these systems, and will hopefully make it so that they can continue to grow those systems. So Boise has one, Cascade, Stanley, a couple other small towns in those areas that have, like, if you look at District 8, which goes through the center of Idaho, all the wilderness areas, there's a ton of geothermal potential power in there. So all those small towns have geothermal setups. It's a really cool thing that I think Idaho needs to double down on.
And where is that? Oh, is in the House and it's in
on
the
House third reading now, I believe. So I'm going to be presenting that bill probably tomorrow.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Godspeed on that.
Yeah, thank you.
But we are blessed to have geothermal energy. We're blessed to have hydro. We have, I think, the second or third lowest rates in the whole country for electricity because of our natural gifts. And then we're hoping that we will lead the nation in nuclear development as well.
We have been for a long time.
I know, right?
We need to double down on that.
I agree.
It's a big deal for the state.
Well, we've been blessed to have Representative James Petzke spend some time with us today. I hope you got to know him a little bit better. He represents Legislative District 21, and he's in his second term. And we just thank you for joining us here on the Idaho House Republicans podcast. And as we always say before we sign off, God bless the great state of Idaho. And thank you, Representative James Petzke.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. Good to be here.
Sunrise on the Snake River Plain, red, white, and blue in the window pane. Work boots dusty from yesterday, but we're back at it the Idaho way. From